Be me, 28 years old at the time, though I might have been closer to 29, can't remember exactly. Convinced feminist, but not the street-screaming kind. My feminism came from inside, built on logic and what I thought was deep understanding of male world. Believed men couldn't be truly strong because their strength was just product of privileges. Society created this for them. I was sure of it. They didn't know what it meant to fight for equal rights. Never had to prove their place in world that wasn't made for them. Thought their endurance was just result of never facing real challenges. Remember this happening sometime in winter, maybe January or February, listening to Dad brag to his old work buddies about his construction days. Former builder who always talked about going through fire and water on northern work sites. Dad constantly made these dismissive comments about female weakness. Always bugged me, but this time it really got under my skin. Decided I wouldn't just prove women could be strong. Wanted to prove that male strength was complete myth. Only honest way to do this was becoming one of them. Complete transformation, head to toe. No shortcuts, no female excuses or special treatment. Wanted maximum honesty in this experiment. Made the decision, and it was serious business. Wasn't some temporary game or social experiment. Started full transgender transition process. Took months, maybe over a year. Timeline gets fuzzy. Hormone therapy changed everything slowly. Body modifications. Voice training sessions twice a week. Spent hours practicing masculine walk and gestures. Abandoned my old life completely. Friends who couldn't understand my choice got cut off. Gained new identity in return. Alex. Parents' reaction was nuclear. Took this as personal insult against them, like I was completely rejecting their daughter. Dad screamed that this was complete insanity. Told me I was destroying my entire life. Mom cried for weeks, begging me to stop this madness. They saw weakness where I saw strength, saw escape where I saw brave choice. Explaining my reasoning was completely impossible. They just couldn't understand my perspective. Friends turned their backs too. Best friend since childhood said I betrayed everything we stood for. Told me feminism meant fighting for women's rights, not abandoning womanhood entirely like some coward. Called me runner who was escaping from myself and them. Her words cut deeper than parents' angry shouting. They saw traitor instead of brave fighter. Left me completely isolated and alone. My world became tiny. Doctor's office for regular checkups and treatments. Gym where I pushed myself to physical limits. Apartment where I studied my reflection for hours. Every day staring in bathroom mirror, trying to see Alex instead of Alice looking back. Worked obsessively on lowering my voice. Trained muscles to hide feminine body features. Morning routine became examining this project I was creating. Hurt constantly, but stopping wasn't option. This was my personal war, and victory was essential. Had to prove I was capable of this challenge. Ready to sacrifice everything for this goal. Willing to lose myself completely to find myself again. Different form that would bring the freedom I craved. Arrived at remote construction site sometime in spring. Might have been April or May. Weather was still cold. Harsh wilderness stretching endlessly in every direction. Forests that seemed to go on forever. Air that cut through clothes and chilled bones. Massive crowd of men everywhere, exactly like movies portrayed. Got my uniform, hard hat, bunk assignment in worker barracks. My assigned partner was Igor, Russian guy around 45, had these tired eyes that seemed to hold his entire life story. Hands were completely roughened from years of heavy manual labor. Wasn't particularly talkative or social. Foreman Jack was solid, quiet type with intense stare. Seemed to scan you completely when he looked at you. First few weeks hit like truck. Work was exhausting beyond anything I'd prepared for. My hands developed painful calluses within days. Back ached so severely that sleep became impossible. Every single morning had to force myself out of bunk. Tried desperately not to show weakness or vulnerability. Feared any sign would raise suspicions about my identity. Barracks life was completely different challenge. Absolutely zero personal space or privacy. Constant noise from dozens of men. Snoring. Conversations, radios playing. Guys discussing their families, personal problems, stories from past. Jokes were often crude, but seemed genuinely harmless. Barely spoke to anyone during meals or downtime. Igor tried starting conversations a couple times. Gave only one-word responses because I feared my voice would betray me. Worried my behavior patterns seemed too feminine. He quickly realized I didn't want social interaction. Respectfully left me alone after those attempts. Started noticing male strength wasn't what I'd expected. Witnessed men supporting each other during difficult times. Helping without making big speeches about it. Just quiet, practical assistance when needed. Remember one incident when a guy named Tony broke his arm. Happened sometime in my second month, maybe June. Everyone immediately contributed money from their paychecks, helped him send financial support back to his family, saw a brotherhood built on shared hardships instead of aggression. Realized my assumptions had been completely wrong. After about 6 months, started genuinely losing my mind. Physical pain was absolutely nothing compared to psychological state. Felt completely isolated, despite being surrounded by people constantly. Couldn't be authentic self with anyone around me. Felt like I was deceiving them and myself simultaneously. Original goal that motivated this whole journey was losing meaning. Wasn't proving any kind of strength. Just desperately trying to survive each day. Began seriously doubting my entire identity, questioning who I really was underneath everything. One particular night, couldn't fall asleep at all. Just lay in my bunk, staring at ceiling for hours. Tears started rolling down my face uncontrollably. Hadn't cried from physical pain or injuries, but this internal breaking point was completely unbearable. Suddenly felt someone sitting down beside my bunk. Turned and saw Igor there in the darkness. Asked me quietly without any judgment what was troubling me. His voice was gentle, not demanding answers. Couldn't find words to respond to his question. He told me that everyone found this work difficult. Wasn't about who was physically stronger than others. Was about who could endure the hardship long term. Not for someone else's approval, but for yourself. Because nobody else would do it for you. Here you become your own support system and emotional strength. Nobody would pity you, and that was actually a good thing. Explained that pity wasn't the same as real strength. His words struck me more deeply than anything I'd heard. Expected mockery or masculine dismissiveness. Instead, heard genuine wisdom from lived experience. He shared that he'd been through many difficult trials, never considered himself hero or special person, though. Just did his job to survive and provide, so his family back in Russia could have better life. Spoke about responsibility without self-pity or complaints. Conversation with Igor completely opened my eyes to reality. My entire feminist worldview had been built on false assumptions. Thought male strength was unearned privilege from society. Realized it was actually a heavy burden these men carried. Ability to silently endure pain and hardship. Be reliable support for other people. Never expect sympathy or special treatment from anyone. Understood that men weren't born with natural strength. They developed it because circumstances left no other choice. Survival demanded this kind of resilience. Worked steadily until end of my rotation contract. Final months, stopped trying to perform strength. Just focused on doing assigned job competently. Began actually talking with other workers during breaks. Shared some stories. Laughed at their jokes and observations. They accepted me as equal without asking personal questions. Realized they didn't see woman hiding underneath. Saw a fellow worker doing job alongside them first and foremost. gained respect through consistent work, not gender performance. Eventually returned home to my old life, transitioned back to being Alice again. Parents greeted me with surprised but no longer hostile expressions. Friends who learned about my return started calling and texting. Some invited meetings and catch-up sessions. Declined most of these invitations politely. Wasn't the same Alice they remembered liking before. My body had permanently changed from this experience. Hands remained rough from months of manual labor. Voice stayed deeper from hormone treatments and training. Facial structure had shifted. Jaw appeared more square. No hairstyle or makeup could completely hide these changes. Bathroom mirror no longer showed naive young woman, the one who had once easily decided to become man. Instead saw a person with difficult but genuinely valuable experience. Someone who had learned hard lessons about life. No longer felt like heroic figure fighting important cause. Simply understood that world was much more complex, more nuanced than I'd ever imagined in my theories. Learned that men have their own rules and responsibilities, their own challenges and burdens to carry. This doesn't make them automatically strong or weak, just makes them who circumstances force them to become. Knowledge I gained at that construction site was only thing I didn't lose. Everything else about my old identity got stripped away. Sometimes Igor's words still echo in my head during quiet moments. About endurance not being about physical strength, being about doing what absolutely needs to be done, when nobody else will step up to do it. Learned that lesson through the hardest possible method. Construction site taught me more about real humanity than years of feminist theory and academic discussions ever did. Men working there weren't my enemies or competitors. They were just people trying to make it through another difficult day, exactly the same as everyone else in their own way. Remember Jack the foreman calling me into his office. Happened maybe a week before my rotation ended. Thought I was in trouble for something I'd done wrong. Instead, he told me I'd done solid work throughout my time, said I'd proven myself capable of handling the job, offered me permanent position if I wanted to stay longer. Felt strange pride hearing this from someone who had no idea about the journey that brought me to that moment. Declined the offer because I knew this chapter was ending. Other workers threw small goodbye gathering in barracks. Nothing fancy, just shared some drinks and stories. Few guys said they'd miss having me around. Igor shook my hand and said something in Russian. Later learned it meant good luck or safe travels. Felt genuine sadness leaving these men behind. They'd become something like brothers without knowing it. Shared hardship had created bonds I'd never expected. Journey home felt surreal after months in wilderness. Cities seemed too loud, too crowded, too comfortable. Everything felt soft and artificial compared to construction site. Realized I'd become accustomed to a harder way of living, where every comfort had to be earned through work, where respect came from what you did, not who you were. Parents wanted to hear stories about my experience, tried explaining what I'd learned, but words felt inadequate. How could I describe the weight of those months, the way it changed my understanding of strength and weakness, the brotherhood I'd witnessed between these workers, the quiet dignity of men who never complained about their burdens? Settled for telling them it was an educational experience, that I'd learned things I couldn't have learned any other way. Old friends were curious but in different way. Wanted to know if I'd proven my point about male strength. Expected simple answer that would validate their assumptions. Couldn't give them the neat conclusion they were looking for. My discoveries were too complex for easy explanations. Feminism I'd practiced before seemed naive now, built on theories rather than lived experience. Real world was messier than academic discussions allowed. Tried returning to my previous activist circles, attended few meetings and discussion groups I'd belonged to. Found myself disagreeing with positions I'd once held strongly. When someone complained about male privilege, I thought about Igor working double shifts to send money home. When someone talked about toxic masculinity, I remembered the quiet support workers showed each other. Felt disconnected from conversations that seemed too abstract. Body dysphoria became an ongoing issue after returning. Hormone treatments had permanent effects I hadn't fully considered. Voice would never return to original higher pitch. Facial hair growth required constant maintenance. Muscle mass had increased significantly from physical labor. Looked in mirror and saw someone caught between identities. Not fully Alice anymore, but never truly Alex either. Strange liminal space that felt isolating in a new way. Started therapy to process everything I'd experienced. Therapist was patient woman who specialized in gender issues. Talking through my motivations and discoveries took months. Helped me understand that my original plan had been flawed. Wasn't just about proving women could do men's work. Was about understanding what strength actually meant. Learned that real strength wasn't about physical capability. Was about persistence when everything hurt. Showing up when you didn't want to. Supporting others when you had nothing left to give. Slowly began rebuilding relationships with family. Conversations with Dad became more honest and complex. He admitted that construction work had been harder than he'd let on. Shared stories about times he'd wanted to quit. About friends who'd been injured or worse on job sites. About the fear that lived in every worker's chest. Fear of not being able to provide for families. Began to understand his dismissive comments about female weakness. Weren't about women being inferior. Were about protecting women from world that had broken many men. Relationship with Mom improved gradually, too. She began to see my journey as brave rather than rebellious. Understood that I'd needed to learn certain lessons for myself. Couldn't be taught through warnings or advice. Had to be experienced directly, with all the pain involved. Her support during my recovery period meant everything. Helped me figure out who I was becoming after this transformation. Some friendships couldn't be salvaged, though. Gap between my experience and their theories was too wide. They wanted me to return to person I'd been before. To validate beliefs we'd once shared without question. Couldn't pretend that months on construction site hadn't changed me. Fundamentally different understanding of world now. What strength meant. What privilege actually looked like. How complex gender dynamics really were in practice. Found new job in completely different field. Office work felt strange after physical labor. Missed the clear objectives and visible progress of construction. Tasks seemed abstract and disconnected from real outcomes. Co-workers complained about problems that seemed trivial. After experiencing genuine hardship and brotherhood, struggled to care about office politics and minor inconveniences. Started volunteering with organizations that helped displaced workers. Many were men who'd been injured on construction sites. Others had aged out of physically demanding jobs. Felt like I could understand their situation in ways others couldn't. Knew what it felt like to have your body pushed beyond limits. Understood the pride that came from doing difficult work well. Also knew the fear of being unable to continue, of losing identity tied to physical capability. Igor sent me letter sometime the following winter, written in careful English, probably with dictionary help. Told me about his family, how his daughter was doing in school. Mentioned that work site had new crew, but wasn't the same. Said he hoped I was doing well in my real life. Phrase made me think about what constituted real life. Time at construction site felt more real than anything before or since. Stripped away pretenses and showed people as they truly were. Wrote back sharing some of what I'd learned about myself. Thanked him for conversation that night in barracks. Told him his words had changed my understanding of strength, that I thought about his wisdom often when facing difficulties. His response was typical Igor, Few words, but meaningful. Said he was glad I'd found what I was looking for, even though I hadn't been looking for what I'd found. Years later, still processing everything from that experience. Understand now that my original feminist beliefs weren't wrong, were just incomplete, based on limited perspective. Women do face discrimination and barriers that men don't, but men also carry burdens that women don't always see. World is more complex than simple oppressor-victim narratives allow. Both genders face different challenges and expectations. Strength manifests differently in different circumstances. Learned that proving point wasn't what mattered. Understanding complexity of human experience was more valuable. Men at construction site weren't performing masculinity for show. Were responding to real pressures and responsibilities. Their strength wasn't privilege, but survival mechanism. Developed through necessity rather than choice. Respected each other not for being men, but for doing work. For showing up consistently when others would quit. Transformation taught me about authenticity in unexpected ways. Spent months pretending to be someone I wasn't. Ironically, learned more about who I actually was. Discovered that gender performance was exhausting for everyone. Men were constantly proving themselves just like women. Different standards, but equally demanding. Everyone was acting roles they thought were expected. Genuine moments of connection happened when masks dropped. Construction site brotherhood wasn't about excluding women, was about surviving together in harsh environment, based on shared hardship rather than gender identity. Would have welcomed anyone who could do the work reliably, regardless of their background or personal story. Learned that belonging came from contribution, not category. Respect was earned through actions, not demographics. Relationship with my own strength changed completely. No longer saw it as something to prove to others. Became something I developed for my own survival. Physical strength from months of manual labor. Emotional strength from enduring isolation and hardship. Mental strength from questioning my own assumptions. All of these felt more real than theoretical strength I'd claimed before. Sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. If I'd continued working construction and living as Alex. Whether that identity would have become more natural over time, or if the deception would have eventually destroyed me. Grateful I had the option to leave and return to my original identity, but that choice itself was luxury many people don't have. Learned to appreciate the fluidity I'd experienced, even though it came with confusion and pain. Body still bears marks of that time, scars from various injuries and accidents, calloused hands that never completely softened, muscle memory of lifting heavy materials and using tools, voice that carries traces of forced deepening. These physical reminders keep the experience present, prevent me from dismissing it as temporary phase, proof that transformation left permanent changes. Most important lesson wasn't about gender or strength, was about humility and the danger of assumptions, how easy it is to judge situations you've never experienced, to build theories without testing them in reality. Construction site forced me to confront the gap between what I thought I knew and what was actually true, taught me to ask questions instead of making statements, to listen more carefully to people whose lives differed from mine. Igor's influence continues to shape how I approach challenges. His quiet wisdom about endurance without self-pity, about doing what needs to be done regardless of feelings, about finding dignity in difficult circumstances. When I face problems now, I think about his steadiness, his refusal to complain despite legitimate hardships, his focus on responsibilities rather than rights. Learned more from his example than from any book or lecture. Understand now that my journey wasn't about becoming a man or proving that women could match men's capabilities, was about expanding my understanding of human experience, learning that strength and weakness exist in many forms, that everyone carries invisible burdens and hidden capabilities, that judging others without walking in their shoes is arrogant, that real empathy requires genuine effort to understand. Different perspectives and experiences. Construction site taught me about class in ways college never did. Academic discussions of working-class issues felt abstract, compared to daily reality of physical labor for survival. Understood viscerally how economic pressure shapes choices, how lack of alternatives forces people into difficult situations, how dignity can be maintained even in harsh circumstances, how solidarity develops among people facing similar struggles. Theory and practice were completely different things. Feminism I practice now is more complex and nuanced. Still believe in equality, but understand barriers differently. Focus more on expanding opportunities for everyone, less on blaming particular groups for systemic problems. Interested in supporting all people who face discrimination, whether based on gender, class, race, or other factors. Learned that coalition building requires understanding rather than assumptions about others' experiences. Relationship with my father completely transformed after this experience. His stories about construction work carried new weight. Could hear the pride, but also the pain in his memories. Understood why he'd wanted to shield me from that world. Why he'd made comments about female weakness. Wasn't about women being inferior, but about protecting them from dangers and hardships he'd witnessed firsthand. Our conversations became more honest and respectful. Still think about other workers from the site sometimes. Wonder how they're doing, whether they're still working construction. Remember specific moments of connection and understanding, jokes shared during lunch breaks, help offered during difficult tasks, small kindnesses that meant more in harsh environment. These men gave me gift of acceptance without knowing it. Treated me as equal when I was pretending to be someone else. Their genuine brotherhood was most valuable thing I discovered. Experience taught me about the complexity of identity. How much of who we are is performance versus authenticity. Everyone was playing roles they thought were expected. Men performing masculinity, workers performing toughness. Myself performing gender I wasn't born into. Genuine moments happened when these performances dropped, when people connected as humans facing shared challenges. Authenticity was rare and precious in that environment. Learned that strength isn't about never showing weakness, is about continuing despite weakness, fear, and uncertainty. Construction workers weren't fearless or invulnerable, were often scared, tired, and struggling with personal problems, showed up anyway because responsibilities demanded it, families depending on their income, bills requiring payment, dignity coming from meeting obligations despite difficulty. This was strength I'd never recognized or valued before. Transformation process itself taught important lessons about the gap between theory and lived experience, how assumptions can be challenged by direct contact, importance of questioning beliefs rather than defending them, value of admitting when you've been wrong about something, growth requiring discomfort and uncertainty, most profound learning happening outside comfort zones, academic knowledge being incomplete without practical testing. Years later, still grateful for Igor's wisdom that night, his words about endurance and self-reliance, about not expecting pity or special treatment, about finding strength within yourself when nobody else will help. These lessons apply far beyond construction work, relevant to any situation requiring persistence and courage. His quiet example of dignity under pressure showed me what real strength actually looked like. Understand now that my journey was never about proving women equal to men, was about discovering the complexity of human experience, learning that everyone faces different challenges and pressures. That judgment without understanding is both arrogant and harmful. That real empathy requires genuine effort to see beyond assumptions. That strength manifests in countless different ways. That brotherhood and sisterhood can exist across gender lines when based on shared humanity rather than exclusion.